There's a moment most men misread completely. You send a message, she replies slower. You suggest meeting, she says she's busy. You feel it immediately, something shifted. And your brain jumps to the worst conclusion. I've been rejected. But psychology suggests something far more uncomfortable and far more accurate. It's not that you became less valuable. It's that you became less stimulating to her emotional system. Because attraction isn't just about who you are, it's about what your presence does inside her nervous system. So here's the real question. If she's not rejecting you, what exactly changed in her brain? In this video, you're going to understand a pattern most men never see. Why interest fades even when you did everything right. Why consistency sometimes kills attraction instead of building it. And why emotional predictability can quietly reduce desire without any conflict at all. We're going deep into behavioral psychology, dopamine response, novelty theory, and attachment dynamics, not as abstract concepts, but as real forces shaping modern dating behavior. And by the end, you won't just interpret rejection differently. You'll understand what actually sustains attraction in the long run and what silently drains it. Because once you see this pattern clearly, you stop taking every shift in behavior personally, and you start seeing the system underneath it. Let's begin. Think about the beginning of any connection. She laughs at your messages. She checks her phone more often. Even small interactions feel charged. Then, weeks later, the same words, same tone, same you, and it feels different. What changed? Not you. Her brain's response to novelty. Psychology calls this habituation, when repeated exposure reduces emotional and neurological response. Dopamine spikes strongest not from comfort, but from newness and uncertainty. In the beginning, everything about you is partially unknown. Her brain fills in gaps, it imagines potential. That imagination fuels emotional intensity. But once you become predictable, same timing, same emotional energy, same responses, the brain stops forecasting reward. And when prediction becomes easy, dopamine drops. Here's the practical truth. It's not about becoming inconsistent or playing games. It's about not becoming emotionally flat. If every interaction feels like a replay, the nervous system stops leaning forward, and when it stops leaning forward, attraction feels like it's fading. Next, let's talk about what most men accidentally do that speeds this up. Transition. Because novelty isn't the only factor, emotional safety can quietly kill tension too. There's a stage where a man thinks he's doing everything right. He's responsive, he's available, he's stable, but something shifts. She becomes less expressive, less curious, less engaged, and he's confused because he's being good. But here's the psychological layer. Emotional safety and emotional stimulation are not the same thing. Attachment theory shows that attraction often exists in a balance between comfort and uncertainty. Too much uncertainty creates anxiety. Too much comfort removes tension. When you become fully predictable emotionally, always agreeable, always available, always easy to read, the dynamic loses contrast. Her brain no longer has to decode you, and decoding is where engagement lives. Think of it like a story. If you already know the ending, you stop watching with intensity. Practical shift here isn't to become distant, it's to maintain internal direction. Have opinions that don't bend instantly, have a life rhythm that doesn't collapse around availability. Let pauses exist without rushing to fill them, because emotional predictability feels safe, but it doesn't always feel alive. Transition, and this is where most men misunderstand distance as rejection, when it's actually neurological recalibration. There's a concept in neuroscience called reward prediction error. Basically, dopamine spikes when reality exceeds expectation, not when things are stable, but when they surprise positively or slightly unpredictably. In the beginning, you naturally create this. She doesn't fully know you yet. So every interaction carries potential upside. But over time, if your behavior becomes perfectly consistent, no emotional variation, no surprise, no contrast, the brain stops generating prediction error. And without prediction error, there's no dopamine spike. This is why attraction can feel like it drops off a cliff even though nothing negative happened. It didn't collapse, it normalized. And normalized chemistry feels like loss. Now here's the actionable part. You don't create reward spikes by being erratic. You create them by being multidimensional, sometimes warm, sometimes focused, sometimes playful, sometimes deeply present but not overly accessible. Not to confuse her, but to keep your presence alive in contrast. Because contrast is what the brain interprets as emotional depth. Transition. But even that isn't the full story because there's a deeper emotional system underneath all of this. Human attachment is not static, it's regulatory. When someone feels too close, the system pushes for space. When someone feels too distant, it pushes for connection. Healthy attraction lives in oscillation, not extremes. But here's where men often misread the situation. They think, if I stay consistent, I'll secure her interest permanently. But the attachment system doesn't respond to permanence, it responds to movement. If everything becomes too available, too immediate, too emotionally accessible, the system stops activating pursuit behavior, and pursuit behavior is tied to emotional investment. This is why sometimes when a man pulls back slightly, not out of manipulation, but out of real focus on his life, interest can actually reappear. Not because absence creates love, but because space reactivates emotional awareness. The key insight is this: attraction breathes in cycles. Too much closeness compresses it. Too much distance breaks it. Your job is not to control her response. Your job is to stop collapsing your entire emotional world into one interaction channel. Transition. And now let's interrupt everything you think you know about losing her interest. Here's a question most men never ask themselves. What if she didn't lose interest in you? What if she lost the emotional contrast she originally experienced with you? Think about that, because in most cases, the man is still the same man, but the emotional experience of him has flattened. And here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't stay attached to people, they stay attached to emotional experiences. So the real fear isn't rejection, it's becoming emotionally interchangeable. There's a subtle shift that happens in relationships that most men never notice. At first, you are a question mark, then you become an answer. And answers don't create curiosity. Familiarity is comforting, yes, but comfort alone doesn't sustain attraction. The brain is always scanning for emotional significance. When something becomes fully known, it gets categorized, filed away, no longer actively processed. That doesn't mean she dislikes you. It means her nervous system stopped updating your emotional file. And this is where men panic and try to do more texts, more effort, more attention. But over-efforting often confirms the familiarity instead of breaking it. The real shift is internal. You maintain emotional individuality. You don't over-explain yourself. You don't over-pursue validation. You keep your life emotionally diverse enough that no single connection becomes your entire emotional identity. Because identity collapse is what creates emotional predictability, and emotional predictability is what ends the sense of tension that attraction feeds on. Transition, and when you see all of this together, something deeper becomes visible. Most men think attraction is about being chosen. But psychologically, attraction is more about being experienced, not as a role, not as a provider, not as a stable option, but as something that creates feeling, contrast, and emotional movement inside another person. And here's the part that can actually change how you see yourself. When someone's interest fades, it doesn't automatically mean you lacked value. It often means the emotional system stopped encountering novelty, tension, or contrast in your presence. That can feel personal, but it's actually mechanical. And once you understand that, you stop interpreting every shift as a judgment on your worth. You stop chasing emotional reactions as proof of significance, and you start building something far more stable, a sense of self that doesn't depend on being emotionally activated by someone else to feel real. Because the strongest attraction is not created by trying to be more wanted. It's created by being internally grounded enough that your presence doesn't collapse when someone else's attention fluctuates. That's the real shift. If this resonated with you, it probably means you've experienced this pattern before, where things didn't end with conflict, but with subtle emotional fading that you couldn't fully explain. And I want to ask you something simple. Have you ever felt someone slowly lose interest in a way you couldn't clearly pinpoint? What do you think changed first, their behavior or your emotional dynamic with them? Share that in the comments. Because the next video builds directly on this idea and breaks down why over-pursuing after a shift in interest almost always makes things worse, even when your intentions are good. And remember this, you're not always being rejected. Sometimes you're just no longer creating a new emotional experience. And an attraction experience is everything.